Jay, the project lead for Blue Sky, and this is the first Spaces conversation in the Blue Sky Community Voices series, organized by the Blue Sky community. And for those of you wondering what the difference between Blue Sky and the Blue Sky community is, Blue Sky is an organization pursuing the decentralized social initiative funded by Twitter, and the Blue Sky community is a broader group of people that were already working towards decentralization that came together under this umbrella. So the Blue Sky community is independent from both Twitter and the newly formed Blue Sky organization. They meet and organize in the Discord linked to at blueskyweb.org and in the tweets under the tweets announcing today's space. So feel free to jump in there to ask questions about this event, to be a part of the further conversation, and to get involved in future spaces and events the community has been organizing. With that said, I'll turn it over to Robert and Abbas right now, the co-moderators for today's space, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Thank you, Jay. This is Robert Schwenker, and I'm working with Golga Velez and setting up the Blue Sky community. As Jay mentioned, there will be a series of these community voices talks, including ones around reputation, content moderation, social graph portability, and we look forward to you all getting involved with us on the Discord and in other places where this group gathers. We're also looking for skeptics to help further this conversation along. So without further ado, I would like you to join me in welcoming Kay Kreutler and Tim Bray, who will frame the first part of the conversation for 15 minutes. Golf clap, please.
Shall I start, or Kay, do you want to go first?
Thanks, you can start.
Okay, hi, I'm Tim Bray. So here we are on a space. I wonder if this is the future form the conversations that matter take place in. The jury is out. Anyhow, identity is a big subject. The aspect we're interested in here today is how it relates to the Blue Sky project, which you can read about starting at a pinned tweet from Jack at the top of the Blue Sky Twitter feed. That's at Blue Sky. The idea is to define a protocol, a standard, so that social media conversations and interactions can extend across the boundaries between providers. So you can imagine Twitter and Reddit, Facebook and Tumblr and Mastodon and your local dog grooming board all being part of a larger social internet conversation and community. From Twitter's point of view, one goal is to allow them to focus on curation and reputation at a larger scale than just Twitter handles. So, from the point of view of conversations, an identity is really what you need to participate. If you have an identity, then you can make posts, you can like posts, you can echo posts, you can follow other identities, you can block other identities. So in the world of social media, there are a huge number of identities that already exist. I have one on Twitter, on Tumblr, on Mastodon, on Reddit, on, can I say the F word? Facebook. So there are already billions of these. Some of them matter to millions of people. Some of them matter to only 5 people, but they matter a lot. So for Blue Sky to work well, we need some form of identity that operates at a larger scale than just one conversation provider, so that we can build reputation and curation and follow people on more than one place and block really obnoxious people everywhere. So let's call that higher level framework a Blue Sky identity. So today we're here to talk about what a Blue Sky identity looks like. There are lots of interesting identity technologies, and it's not obvious to me that any of them are obvious winners for Blue Sky or obviously impossible. So the horizon is open. This is a fun time. I think this should be super interesting to people who've been working on identity, and there's a lot of those people. So I do want to say 2 things before I stop. First of all, it seems very clear to me that we cannot abandon the billions of existing identities. Somehow or other, they all need to be part of the Blue Sky identity ecosystem. Second, Blue Sky identities have to be effortless to get, they have to be free, and they have to confer an immediate, unsubtle benefit. Nothing abstract, something concrete, something that a Blue Sky identity lets you do that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do, because otherwise nobody will bother. And so that's really all I have to say to set the stage. Kay, over to you.
Thanks, Tim. That was fantastic framing. And I'm really interested in what we'll come to today in terms of thinking through a Blue Sky identity. And by way of introduction, I'm Kay Kreutler. So I've been in the decentralized technology space for the last 4 years. I work on strategy at Gnosis, which is a company that builds infrastructure for the Ethereum blockchain ecosystem. So a little bit oblong to what we'll be discussing today. But one thing to note is that we've built a multi-signature account that has become something of a standard in the ecosystem. And it's brought a lot of insights over the last 4 years working on it. So related to today's panel, I think what Web3 introduces to identity paradigms online, so thinking through what decentralized technology or other forms enable in terms of login and identity, is a deeper interest in kind of shared group accounts like multi-sigs. This is somewhat of a niche detour, but I think is really relevant for when we think through how we can remap political agency through online accounts. So in essence, multi-sigs are kind of multi-signature accounts. That means they can require multiple signers to confirm a transaction or action online. In just a minute or two, a group of friends can spin up a collective account and hold digital assets in common, as well as participate and interact collectively with online applications. So in the way you might have a Mastodon ID or a separate ID, you can think of groups as one shared identity through these systems. And I think with phenomenon, however trite, like Wall Street bets and other things like shared accounts and multi-sigs, I think we're seeing a trend toward team-based interneting, so interneting as a group or as a team, amidst a more pseudonymous economy than we've seen previously. What this means for the realm of identity is that really on a cultural level, we have the opportunity to rethink the core unit of account when it comes to participating online. It's perhaps not only the identity of the solo individual, but a kind of collective institution that has its own form of representation as a collective institution or bargaining right. And I think furthermore, particularly when we think of accounts online, and especially the idea of a wallet, or if we introduce decentralized systems that involve some form of finance to identity, these wallets or identities massively need disambiguating, because often wallets or IDs end up serving as login identity systems, and on many blockchains, public records of their account activity are available. So as we develop what we think of as a blue sky ID, these are some things to take into account. And some people embrace this as a kind of public reputation, but I'm deeply anxious about the social implications of this, especially when applied to larger scale social platforms. So basically, Web3 wallets' range of possibilities and identities mean that they're actually a very powerful identity regime, and we should think carefully about how we wield them, especially as the distinction between financial applications and social applications fade. So in addition to privacy shields, and I think what many others will be talking about today in terms of standards, I want to kind of offer up as a speculative idea that what we need is a technical stack that supports not one identity, but a collection of identities to navigate the highly varied context of a kind of internet to come. And my really belief is that the accounts of the future may look much more like inventories, so accounts that hold multiple identities, and less like identities themselves. And we need a more informed culture to support this. Yeah, and I think just giving those remarks in terms of, we can also take a kind of idea of identity from first principles as well, whether it's an individual user or a group, and use that to allow and inform different kinds of standards for what we see for the next generation of social platforms. And I guess with that, I'll kind of give it to the floor in general to discuss potentially with a round of intros or otherwise to different people's approach to online identity.
Thanks for that handoff, Kay. So quickly introducing myself, I'm Abbas. I will be moderating today's conversation. And quick introduction about myself. I have been working in engineering for years. They needed the skeptic to come moderate this, and there I was. And I will hand it off to the various speakers today for their quick introductions before we kick off the conversations.
Kalia, would you like to start?
Sure. My name's Kalia Young. My handle's Identity Woman, and I've been working on the question of how individuals can have control over their digital representation of themselves for almost 2 decades since I got connected with the augmented social network building identity and trust into the next generation internet, and I co-host the Internet Identity Workshop that we just came off of this week. It was great.
I'll nominate Evan next.
Hi, my name's Evan Prodromo, best known for chairing the social working group at W3C. I'm the co-editor of the Activity Streams 2.0 specification, Activity Pub, the protocol that runs the Mastodon network. Previously, I was co-author of the O-Status protocol. I created software called StatusNet, which ran the much beloved distributed social network Identica, also co-creator of the Pump.io software. Folks may also know me from the social web acid test. I am the Evan persona in that test. Glad to be here.
Brooklyn, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Brooklyn Zelenka. I'm the CTO and co-founder at Fission. We're doing deep R&D in a lot of areas in sort of the future of the web, Web3, distributed web, and participates in groups like the Decentralized Identity Foundation and are working towards and in fact have built a number of standards to do things that let you disaggregate and aggregate identities and various capabilities in that, which I'm very excited to talk about.
Great. And Michael?
Sure. Hi. Thanks. I'm happy to be here. I'm Michael. I am CEO and co-founder of 3Box Labs. My team and I have been really active in decentralized identity standards and implementation work now for over 5 years. And yeah, I mean, personally, I've just been really passionate about trying to solve the problems of how do users maintain agency and control of themselves online for quite a while. So excited to be here and hear the perspectives of all the other speakers.
And just to get a quick formal intro from Tim, back to you.
Oh, hi, my name's Tim Bray. I'm an old guy. I've been doing internet since before there was an internet. I've done a couple of startups. I spent several years at Google, including a couple in Google's identity group. Most recently, I was at AWS for 5.5 years. I've done standards work on Atom and XML and JSON Path and yada, yada, yada. Main reason I'm here is I remember the good old days when you could use XMPP and have all your chats in one nice open source client. I don't see why social media can't be like that.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for the introductions. So I can start seeding this conversation with a few of the questions that we've collected over the last week. We want to hopefully run this as a discussion. And as I ask these questions, folks who have opinions about them, please feel free to unmute. My job here is just to make sure that the conversation goes well in an organized fashion and in a civil fashion. I will not be muting anyone at any point. And I'll start off with some of the stuff that we've already been talking about. So a lot of you have brought up decentralized identities. We've talked about social networks. And one of the questions that kept coming up was, how do we balance people's privacy with the desire to link together all of their identities?
Well, hearing silence, I'll step in. This is Tim. It's clearly the case that some people want to maximize their voice, and they are the kind of people who would probably aggressively link together all their identities. There are other people for whom having many different independent voices that can't be linked together is vitally important as a matter of safety, if nothing else. And clearly, both of those idioms have to be supported. An open question is, so to link your identities together, probably you have to do that. Somebody who's competing reputations, could they, on a third party, say that I consider, Tim at Twitter and Tim at Tumblr to be the same identity for the purpose of reputation? without asking me? That's a tricky question, but I would assume that the option of linking or not linking has to be core to the protocol. I can't imagine anybody would disagree. That would be a good time to disagree.
Evan, it looked like you had something to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting use case. I think it's one that's often covered within platforms by having different kind of aspects or personas, having different contact lists, that kind of thing. Across systems, it's interesting. I think it is probably a small group who needs that, right? Folks who are, say, building a personal brand, they want to be known for their videos as well as their SoundCloud, as well as their comments on Reddit. I think that for a lot of other folks, the privacy side of the dial is probably higher, and they'd rather not have things connected.
I think it also goes in the opposite direction as well, right? So not just taking a single individual and trying to link them across various services, but even on a single service, if they're a member of a group or a collective of some kind that has joint control over an account, you sometimes want to be very upfront about that fact, and sometimes you want that to be totally anonymous, and that absolutely has to get built into any protocol that supports that.
Yeah, sorry, Kalia. I can sort of speak anecdotally about creating software for developers to use to build these sorts of applications with sovereign data today, and there's a strong demand. I completely agree with Tim in that the protocol has to support the user's choice, or has to support an abstraction that allows a user to link multiple accounts or keep them separate. But at least in the emergence of sort of the Web3 metaverse today that we're seeing being built on top of various interconnected blockchain ecosystems, there's a really strong demand for users, at least in a certain subset of use cases, where they want their activity and interactions across all of these different applications, platforms, and ecosystems to be unified, and actually see that as a strong, compelling value proposition for a decentralized identity system that does support connections.
Yes, I think that, I've talked about this as the freedom to aggregate and the freedom to disaggregate. And just this past week, Spruce Systems shared a kind of aggregate linking system that they've developed for folks mostly in cryptocurrency land, but I think other actually linking social accounts by sharing keys publicly on those accounts and proving that the same person is in control of multiple accounts.
So I guess this is a good foray, because we're already discussing decentralized identities. What is the best tooling that we have that exists today when it comes to decentralized identities? And alternatively put, what is lacking in that tooling that we want to be building towards?
Well, let me start by being controversial. We've been working on this problem for a long time. I think the first real outburst of energy was around the original OpenID proposal. How long ago was that? Oh my goodness, it's got to be over 10 years anyhow. And it's remarkable.
2005.
When was that, Kalia?
2005.
Wow. And it's remarkable how much work has gone into this. And I hate to be a downer here, but it's also remarkable how little benefit has come out. OpenID Connect is here and it works, but nobody would call that terribly decentralized. So, decentralized identity, I think it's fair to say, still remains a bit of a dream.
Yeah, you could say it's super successful because everybody's logging in with Google, Facebook, GitHub, and Amazon, and they don't even know that that's the OpenID under the hood. I think it's incredibly challenging, and I'm really excited about the new identifier system, decentralized identifier standard that's coming forward as potentially breaking through the sort of technical logjam that we've been in.
Yeah, I agree that DIDs are very exciting potential solution to this problem. I think one of the major barriers to using something like OpenID Connect is that it's just difficult to get it up, get it running, and people are more interested in using an existing solution than self-hosting. There's a lot of effort and thought being put into having DIDs be out-of-the-box compatible and interoperate. Now, there's a huge number of them. There's at least, several hundred. So that's a challenge on its own. The further problem that we've had recently is out of the W3C rejection of DIDs from, at least in their current state, from entering into browsers. So having direct browser support would be a major part of tooling that would be very helpful.
So just quickly addressing something that you just brought up, Brooklyn, how do we solve for the hundreds of types of DIDs that we already have? Is there a solution there, or is it just we need to get to some way of consolidation?
Yeah, so we've done, proof of concepts interoperating between different systems. And because they're all based on fundamentally some form of or the vast majority of them are based on some form of public key cryptography. Validating tokens and certificates between them is not an insurmountable task, right? This isn't so difficult. It's just a matter of actually sitting down and doing the work of putting that tooling together and then making it widely available so that anyone can run it and then embed it in any tool so that it's not having to be built from scratch every time.
Kalia, did you want to add something about the universal resolver?
I'll just say that there is a universal resolver and that, I think we need to build decentralized identifiers and a neighboring spec verifiable credentials are in the state they're plumbing, right? So now it's really up to tool builders to leverage them to build things that normal everyday web users can use. They're not there yet, but the plumbing, it's there, and that's what's exciting, I think.
I mean, there's also good news, which is that with modern, public key technology and so on, it's actually pretty easy to map existing social media identities together. I'm sure other people have worked on this. A couple weeks ago, I posted a little thing on GitHub called BluesKid, BLUESKID, which is just a bunch of Go code that does signed posts to show that, two entities control the same private key at some point in time, which was pretty good method for mapping them together. So the mapping together, I think, we should be optimistic about that. So the interesting question is, what do you map them to? Because you do need, it's not enough to say, Tim at Reddit and Tim at Twitter are the same thing. You want to give the thing a label, and that's what a Blue Sky identity is. So assuming we can figure out how to represent it, I think the mapping part is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here. I think that the idea that possession of a private key in a public key cryptography system is a panacea. I think it's it has been proved out as being really not the case, right? I mean, you only have to look at all the abandoned, lost, robbed Bitcoin wallets in the world to know that people have a really hard time keeping control of their private keys for important systems, even when there's money on the line, much less when they're just managing their Twitter account or something. So I think that there's some real usability issues with a private key as your only last identity, even putting it into a really good tooling on the Leaf nodes on people's phones or on their computers. So it sounds great on paper. It looks great. In the real world, it's something that tends to lose pretty quickly.
So I have to say I agree 100% with Evan, and I would go further than that. I would say any identity solution that requires individuals to, in a meaningful sense, own key pairs isn't going to work. People can't do that. It's just too hard. You don't actually need that to prove linkage. You make a key pair. You sign a couple of assertions with a private key. You destroy the private key, and the assertions still establish that at some moment in time you controlled it. You don't have to own it long term. But I agree. I think, I've heard several identity pitches that say, well, a person is a key pair, and I don't buy that at all.
Totally agree with you, Tim.
Just giving 5 seconds to see if any of the speakers disagree with anything that was said before I move on.
Well, there are blockchainers on here. I know people who are big blockchain fans, not including me. And on blockchain, you are sort of a key pair, right? So did somebody want to introduce an argument as to why that's a good way to run?
Sure. So I would say that the underlying mechanism of the account can be a key pair, but that there are promising things like social recovery or looking at projects like the Bright ID project, which are basically under the hood a kind of public address, but basically a relational web of trust system for identity verification, abstract that away from the user and allow for other forms of social recovery that I think are also promising in terms of the cultural layer as well of how we think about our accounts being guaranteed rather than through a kind of more typical institutional lens, which people seem to be the kind of cognitive trade-off when it's the, OpenID behind the Google sign-in, is that like, if you have a social network or a social graph that you can trust with that kind of power, then we could also see people maybe caring more about kind of particular forms of identity maintenance.
Yeah, and I would actually sort of say that, we have been creating, products and protocols for developers building blockchain-based applications primarily. And so, we have had to sort of grapple with this problem for a long time. How do we reconcile the fact that, maybe your favorite Ethereum application uses this key pair account as its identity, and Ethereum does generally, with the other side of it being that, a user potentially wants to control their data from across multiple different wallets and systems. And so I would say that there's been a growing desire from the blockchain community to clarify those abstractions because it does all the things for data portability that they couldn't do if they were just using a single account like they do for sort of wallet management.
So quick question, and this is coming from the Web2, the non-DID person me. So does this mean if your private DID key is lost or stolen, your entire identity is stolen? And that would be across all mediums?
Well, that's certainly the case in the world of Bitcoin, for example. If you lose the key, you lose the money.
It depends on the specific type. With many of them, you can connect multiple keys and revoke them. So there's a whole key management aspect to that. So let's say you lose your phone, you go to another device, remove that key, probably named as the device, and then add another one when you get a new phone.
I think there's a misconception about sort of taking Web 2 analogies of accounts and translating them over into DIDs and Web 3 in a model, like, because we have the power of software and software on tiny computers in our pockets called phones, we can manage and control potentially hundreds, if not thousands of DIDs. And we can actually, there's a protocol called DIDCOM that has a lot of promise in terms of supporting us owning our own social graphs, where we establish using using DIDs, not just peer to peer connections between us and whoever's in our social network outside of any particular namespace. And, that's one of the things I think we're going to touch on today is owning your own social graph. And I think this is one path to be able to do that.
Kalia, do you want to just go down the route of owning your own social graph? We can start that conversation off now.
Sure. I mean, if you have a software agent that is under your control, that's open source, hopefully, and you use DIDCOM to establish connections with all the people that you want to speak to, you can pull that social graph you've connected in your software and software that your peers control to different contexts.
I suspect most people would rather outsource that. I mean, it sounds cool, but I suspect most people would just want to, sign into something and hear what their friends have to say.
Just to keep it going, Michael, Evan, Kay, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, there's so many different ways that it could be implemented. I think really it depends on what sorts of standards emerge in the system. But, for example, if you have one place where this could live is, as Kalia described, in a, self-hosted agent that you're running or you're paying someone to run on your behalf. Alternatively, sort of this data could be published and hosted on a decentralized network infrastructure that sort of removes the need of hosting and provides guaranteed availability to users and third-party applications simultaneously. So I think there's an aspect to, the sovereign social graph that is beyond sort of just interoperable data schemas, but I actually think data availability and access is something that really needs to be considered.
I'll pop in here. I think there's a really interesting relationship between identity, meaning who I am, and social graph, meaning who I know, who I want to talk to, who I connect to. It is interesting to think about social graph as an identity. I'm defined by my relationships. But it feels like we might be wandering into social graph territory, and we might want to pull things back to identity.
Also jumping in, the other disambiguation is between who someone is and what they can do. So especially if you're going to be trying to use a single identity across many different services from many different devices, you may not want that identity to be able to do everything from an untrusted device, let's say. So there's many different aspects of this, and so I agree drilling down into the specific portion might be helpful.
From a social media point of view, what do you need to know about an identity? There's only one thing you need to know, absolutely incontrovertibly. It's that this is the person behind, Joe at Twitter. That's established by the fact that they can post there. Now, clearly, you would like to know more about, the entities behind identities. And clearly, once you've figured out a way to represent those entities, you need a way to hang assertions on them and gather evidence and so on. But, I get very nervous when people start talking about, well, who's the person? What's the person behind this identity? I don't think that's often the way to go. We can know things about it, but the notion that an identity is necessarily human is not a good assumption.
I've also just added in Daniel, in case he has any thoughts to share on this while we're playing catch up. Hopefully we can hear him. Great.
Daniel,
Okay.
CSU Wildcat. Yeah, feel free to introduce yourself and chime in.
I think he's still muted.
Daniel, your show is muted.
All right, I will continue this conversation for now, and once he gets unmuted, we'll add him in to the mix. So just to keep this back to some of the practicality then as well. So what are some examples that you're seeing decentralized IDs being used in practice today? And just to have some order to this, Brooklyn, do you want to kick it off?
Sure, yeah. Interoperation between multiple different applications, and even better flows like paths with the plugin and just pairing devices, things like that, because it has the public key backing. But the main use case that we're seeing for it is interoperation between multiple applications with the same ID. And so then you don't have to have this proliferation of identities unless you want that.
Passing it to Kay.
Sure. So not specifically adhering to DID identifiers, but I would say looking at kind of, once again, Web3 accounts like MetaMask or like Gnosis Safe or like other tools and Argent wallets, which you have a kind of large multiplicity of tools that basically carry around an account's assets, and whether those financial assets, but you could also think of data about that person or a kind of asset that identified data, almost like a DID token standard that would be ported from platform to platform. So in the same way that you would use a social media account, there are other social media accounts that you can log in and bring your identity to the platform rather than create the identity through the platform itself. There's a self-hosted kind of, within the language of the culture, self-custodial aspect to these accounts. And I would say also across them in terms of returning, hopefully not entirely to, but related to the public-private key discussion, that you also have contract-based accounts. So these are things that will also have kind of functions that can be called within the accounts or that can perform specific actions within applications. So there's also not this idea of a kind of static DID identifier, but also an account that has particular actions native to the account and type itself. So I think this is where we also come to a disambiguation between what an account is able to do versus how an account identifies itself. And also the idea that accounts inherently and types of accounts have certain actions inherent to themselves, not just within platforms themselves, is where I think we'll see also a paradigm shift related to how identity functions. But a lot of these are just on kind of Web3 application layers at the moment.
So I guess, okay, quick question. How much of this is being used in the wild today versus how much of what you just said is a proposal for how it should be used in the future?
So I would say it's still definitely niche, but all of it is functional software and being used by, it depends on which account, which platform you would talk about, but at least by, I would say, give an estimate of how many MetaMask accounts there are. So we don't have a very good estimate of kind of daily active users in terms of unique identity, because you can create a multiplicity of accounts, but hundreds of thousands of accounts across ecosystems of dozens of applications. Still not touching the web at large, but the software is very much out of a speculative stage and built.
Great. Passing it to Evan.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go ahead and completely pivot because I have one thing that I want to bring up. We're here on Twitter Spaces. Twitter's the originator of the Blue Sky project, although we've had a lot of people coming in. I think one of the main strengths of Twitter has been that it has a user visible and easy to remember identity scheme. So a flat naming process Your Twitter handle is an identity that you can take pretty much anywhere, and we've seen a lot of uptake by people of this identity. Can we take the simplicity and attractiveness of the Twitter flat namespace handle system and take it to a distributed identity world?
I'm going to say probably not, because, you know, people like you and me, Evan, we got here first. So we got, you know, nice, short, easy to remember identities. And, you know, if you're joining Twitter today, being, you know, a late arriver in a flat namespace kind of sucks.
Can I ask a question about something I heard earlier? I don't know if I was off for about 5-10 minutes, but this is Daniel Buckner. I do decentralized identity at Microsoft. People were saying, hey, you know what? The average person doesn't need a persistent identifier. They just have a key that they grab, they make an assertion, they run away. And the only people who need persistent IDs are these folks who, you know, big influencers or like, you know, celebrities and stuff. I want to challenge that. I know there was an open call to challenge it. Doesn't seem to be the case. I think most people on Twitter have been here for years at a time. They'd probably not enjoy if their contacts were all lost. Like every time they tweeted, it was just kind of like into the void. So clearly, like 80% of what we do as humans online is generally public. You know, people, whether you like LinkedIn or not, a lot of people here have LinkedIn accounts. Whether you like Instagram or not, people have Instagram accounts. And then a lot of our public career stuff and, you know, community stuff is tied to identities we want people to know. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have private identities, because I'm, you know, libertarian. I like all my burners too. But I think it's a little strange to make the assertion that like most people don't want one correlated ID that they can use for social interaction. I think that's probably the case.
I think it should be a flexible model, right? Where you can have small identities, large identities, and links between them. You should be able to act pseudonymously or in full knowledge of who you are as the human that is you, right? So absolutely needs to handle all of these cases. I don't see there being any fundamental challenge around that with the building blocks that we have. If anything, this move into a lot of the techniques we've already been discussing, especially coming out of the Web3 space, make it very flexible to do this.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's a both. I heard earlier on the call, you know, people saying, yeah, we're getting kind of dismissive of having that social ID. And I think it's very important to have that option as well.
Yeah, and I agree with, you know, I think there is a lot that people want linked, but I also think that there is, you know, it's really important to understand that women manage their identities across context much more strongly than most men do. We keep our dating lives very separate from our online personas. And people from marginalized communities that are under threat or in danger, if there is a link between what they say in a public space and their real, you know, the identity that they're known on their government paperwork is made, if the link is made. So I think, you know, yes, people want the freedom to link, and we must not assume that everybody wants everything.
Yeah, I mean, don't misconstrue what I said. I'm not saying like you have to have one identity or you have to have a social identity. I just think my assertion is that the vast majority of people on the planet probably have a social identity and a career identity that are roughly public. That's the only claim.
And this,
I want to build on something. I want to build on something that Tim asked, which is how can we hang assertions on our identities? And I think the good news is that there's an emerging protocol called verifiable credentials that has very broad expressive capacity that lets anyone, any entity or any person assert something about another entity or person. And that those can be a really new tool in our toolbox of understanding who people are and what their qualifications are. And you can also do things like ZKPs. Like I could have an account as a climate scientist with a day job with a a petrochemical company, and I could prove that yes, I have a degree in climate science, and you should use that weighting in what I say, but not actually link it to my day job identity. So that's a tool that is emerging as well that can support more information sharing and from various sources about who people are in this emerging decentralized social space.
Yeah, Kalia, I agree. I think verifiable credentials are a really important thing to consider in the toolkit, especially when building systems like, decentralized reputation or this sort of assertion-based model. Someone says something about someone, and that someone could be themselves or that someone could be someone else. But I actually think, in many cases, it could be likely sufficient that, if we really desire to make things like application data interoperable, that kind of signed data might be sufficient as a more generalization of verifiable credentials. And it's really just about applications agreeing on what schema and format the data is stored in rather than like a requirement on a verifiable credential.
Yeah, I would say there's many ways of representing that data. I think verifiable credentials are extremely powerful, useful, and should be considered the gold standard going forward, just because we've had enough community effort go into making this thing what it is. But it doesn't have to be the only one. And there's also nothing saying that you can't use verifiable credentials with other systems and vice versa, right? I think that might be part of the flexibility that was being mentioned earlier.
Because I'm heading into the time where I need to get to closing remarks soon, I do want to get to one last question, and this is meant to be purposely open-ended, which is, what is everyone's vision of a world where everyone has decentralized identities? And I'll cap folks to just a couple minutes to answer this one, just so that we can get to closing remarks as well. And I'm just going to go in the order that I see folks on my screen. So Michael, you're up first.
Yeah, it's the internet that it's sort of rebuilt around, I don't want to say people, I'm using people as a substitute for identity, but it's really a new internet architecture that is sort of designed around a core principle of interoperability and the types of interactions that will enable in the future, where, you can sort of imagine a world free of onboarding frictions and sort of cold start problems and bootstrapping new data and people networks on every platform. That's a future that I'm really excited to be a part of.
Great. Passing it to Tim.
Well, the reason I'm interested in Blue Sky is that it's one of the first opportunities I've seen where having a decentralized identity actually gets you a real concrete, tangible capability that you don't have otherwise, which is that your conversations can now extend past the particular service you're using to host them, so that conversations can sprawl across Twitter and Instagram and everything else. And that seems like a great thing that will improve the quality of people's lives and potentially make the internet more interesting. One of the big problems with, sovereign and decentralized identity is, well, what's in it for me? What do I get from that? It's not abstract and ideological. Well, here's something you get for that. And thus I like it. So my vision is an ecosystem where the Blue Sky protocol makes all the conversations work on all the things.
Great. Brooklyn. You're still showing up as mid, Brooklyn.
So I see sovereign identity as Is that better?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I see the self-sovereign identity portions of this being both exciting and critical in the future, both for the ability to, as Tim just said, control and reuse your identity in many places and be able to participate in many conversations, but also to be able to, and yes, the UX aspects, being able to onboard easily and lowering all that friction, but also being able to hand off portions of your capabilities to software agents or to temporarily on devices, and having a much more granular control and being able to create them even potentially on device and not controlled by some third party feels very much like the future. And having all of these systems be able to interoperate and talk has been, I think, possible, but a large pain in the past decade. And this seems like a way of reinventing that.
Great. Kay.
Sure. So I'd agree with everything that has been said so far in terms of a kind of technical infrastructure for portability, interoperability, and also a form of self-sovereignty. I would add to this that I would like to see the kind of ramifications of this on a social level, is that a form of identity and kind of experimentation and trust can return to online spaces. So I think whilst maybe it's been posited on this conversation that the average user doesn't care so much about maintaining their own identity online, I think at large the public's trust has really been lost in the ability of large tech corps or just technology in general to securely store data and protect one's identity. So I would like, with the kind of emergence of secure decentralized identity, a form of identity online that can be really focused on experimentation. That means basically you can have trusted contexts, whether it's chat applications or other social contexts, where you know that you can find out verifiable details about someone, maybe in a zero-knowledge setting or otherwise, but that you don't need necessarily to know, and also that you can trust that your data is safe and under your own control. And I think that this will allow a form of kind of social dialogue and freedom that doesn't really persist and exist on the web today. And it will also have the flip side of creating new forms of accountability. But I would really like to see this experimentation return once the technical infrastructure enables it.
Great. Oh, go ahead, Cleo.
I'll chime in and agree with what Kay just said. I think that vision of what the opportunity that we have is really resonating with me. And I also think that I know that, humans were not designed, so like our wiring is not designed to be in spaces with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people all conversing at once. In fact, it is small social groups that build their own cohesion that are, that's how we evolved, right? So I actually am a little bit scared about what Tim said about all the people talking all the places. I don't think people want that. I think that's gonna hurt marginalized folks more than it helps move social conversations forward. So I look forward to seeing all the experimentation that we have coming off this new generation of tools.
Great. Evan.
Yeah, I think identity is a place more than almost anywhere else where perfect is the enemy of the good. We could spend a lot of time thinking about all the possible cases, and or we can get some easy identifiers out there, start using them, and find out how they work. So I think that is, if we spend the next 5 years or 10 years of Blue Sky working on the most abstruse parts of the problem space, this will be a failed project. I think that getting to using simple identifiers that people put on their business cards, like a Twitter handle, email like Webfinger, XMPP style, or an URL, getting to something that people understand and can share is going to be the best way forward. Thanks.
Great. And Daniel, since we have you as a speaker, anything from you to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I'm most interested in to keep the eye on the prize, I like to think of identity as everything that you say, do, that can be attached to you, and that includes all your app data. So we're talking about a social use case predominantly here, but really all apps can be decentralized identity apps. I look forward to a feature where right now I use Google Keep, and I happen to send blobs that are notes. Not very different than sending blobs that are tweets, right? And if all those are housed in your personal data stores, and all those applications essentially can be between you and your encrypted data store. So it's not even just about social. I think that this is the underpinnings of more privacy-preserving apps of all kinds, whether they include interaction with others or not. And that's what I'm most excited for, is just a return to applications that are just centered around the user instead of around some large middleman who obviously is just surveilling it for negative capitalist desires.
Great. This was a great conversation for everyone. I will start wrapping it up shortly. Is there anything that any of the speakers want to add before I start wrapping up? All right. Well, thank you so much for attending. For me, it was a great learning experience. There's a lot of homework that I've actually made notes on. There's also a great conversation going on in the Blue Sky community Discord right now. And Robert will be taking over to talk about how we can continue this conversation after this Spaces wraps up.
Thank you so much, Abbas, and thank you so much to all of our speakers. We do have about 4 more minutes. We can take a few questions from the audience. I think there's Aaron Goldman, who's been speaking a lot in the Discord, and perhaps others. Let me hand the mic to Aaron. If you could keep your remarks under a minute, much appreciated. Go ahead. And this is Aaron David Goldman. And
yeah, so my main question was, we talked about people who want to link their identities. There are a lot of YouTubers who have a Twitter handle in their profile. There are a lot of people on Twitter who have a YouTube channel in their profile. That's actually a pretty strong assertion that these two things are the same identity because they both say so, and we got that information to HTTPS. So, are we done? What do we really gain by having a more programmatic, machine-readable way to deal with linking these two identities as opposed to the human-readable we have now?
Can I think here, I'll throw something out there that I think is one primary cause of concern, right? It's really, really great if you've never experienced the joy of being Thanos snapped out of existence from one of these companies. But unfortunately, tens of millions of people a year do experience that. And so I don't think it's about the fact that one friendly identifier scheme or another reads better in text. It's more about the fact that if you don't own your own IDs, much like you don't own your keys in Bitcoin, you don't own your identity, and you can be erased from the fabric of digital discussion. And I think that it's a big deal, right? So I want to own my own IDs because I want to be independent and connect independently of any one intermediary, personally.
To address Aaron's issues there, so you said aside from the advantage of being machine readable, what's the win? Are we done? And okay, fair enough. But I think the advantage of being machine readable is really pretty big because that gives things like reputation algorithms and curation algorithms a better ladder to climb as they try and work in a cross-service way. I'd really rather not write the code that reads into YouTube header YouTube identities and tries to parse them and figure out what they're saying. So let's make it machine readable, okay?
thanks. Let's take a question from Mark Staub. Again, Mike, if you could just keep it, say, under 30 seconds or so. Go right ahead.
You're muted, Mike.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, great conversation. One thing I just wanted to add is kind of like an interesting edge case that I haven't heard discussed in any of the protocols is the ability to create multiple public IDs that map to the same private one. For example, I have my own domain. Whenever I sign up to a new service, I do like eventbrite.com at my domain, or yourservice.net at my domain, so I can easily see who's selling my information, where.
Mike, unfortunately, it's breaking up a bit.
Oh, sorry about that. It's probably my connection. Did you understand what I was saying, though, about the use case?
I don't think we quite caught it. Go try one more time, just very quickly.
Okay. So when I give people my email, I do eventbrite.com at my domain or facebook.com at my domain. And that way I can see who is sharing my identity, who the spammers or things like that. So I think we need something like this at the protocol level so we can have multiple public IDs that map to the same private one.
Got it. Thanks, Mike. Kalia, Brooklyn, Kate, Evan, Michael, Tim, Daniel.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds definitely like a great utility. I think the primitives are there, but I haven't seen any specifications to date that are specifically geared towards that or in practice. But I think it's a great thing to strive for.
Terrific. We are going to continue this conversation over at Blue Sky Commons. And for all those who've requested to speak, we'd love to add you in. Thanks, Mo and Patrick and Steve and others who've been requesting to speak. We'd love to hear your voice. We will, again, continue this as a series. Next month, we'll announce soon another panel. And we'll also have a Q&A from the Blue Sky group coming up, which Jay may touch on. We'd also like to thank all of the volunteers who've been assisting with the preparation of this. We have people across the world helping us, people in Miramar and Latin America and such who've really been supporting us to make this happen. Thank you for that. We are very grateful to Golda Velez and all of her work she's done to build this community. There's a lot going on over in the Discord, as Abbas mentioned. So please continue to reach out with us. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll pick up in the at Blue Sky Commons space. So we have those links in the Twitter channels. So again, we'll take a 5-minute break here. I would like to hand it back over to Jay Garba for any final remarks.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to have to discontinue this space that we're hosting right now and turn it over to the Blue Sky Commons. We might lose some people in that migration, but I do encourage everyone who wants to keep talking and join in a more open forum discussion to hop over there. So I wanted to close this space down in just a few minutes. First, I'm going to see if I can place a link to that in here, but actually it's probably easiest if you just go to the Blue Sky Twitter account and look at the next space that we've linked to. Thank you guys so much for the conversation. And again, if you want to participate in future conversations or just get involved in these kinds of events in general, all this organizing has been going on in the community Discord, and that's linked to in some of the tweets under the one announcing this space. So on the website, blueskyweb.org, there's a link to the community Discord. And so if you hop in there, it's a great place to get involved and kind of see everything going on and participate in future events. Thank you.